Everyone knows movies take liberties with a lot of aspects of real life, as screenwriters bend the facts, usually of science and history, in order to fit their script. But one thing many might not notice gets taken advantage of is time. And thanks to a little magic called editing, we get to skip many mundane details, such as going to the bathroom, long car rides, or, in the case of the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise, several days, even months at a time at sea. This article on Cracked by Tara Marie and Matt Cowan points out sea travel back then was quite slow. Ships of that era certainly looked impressive and were remarkable feats of engineering, but fast was a relative term as they moved at an average speed of 13.36 kilometers an hour. This means the voyage in the first film's prologue, from London to Port Royal, a distance of 7,633 kilometers, would have taken 23 days, 19 hours, and 18 minutes. So, since I enjoy overthinking and ruining my favorite movies just as much as anybody else, I thought I'd see how long The Curse of the Black Pearl really took. First, we need to know the locations of the four main settings: Port Royal, Tortuga, Isla de Muerta, and Rum Runner's Isle. The first two are easy since they are real locations. Port Royal is located on the mouth of Kingston Harbor on the southeastern coast of Jamaica, and Tortuga is an island off the northern coast of Haiti. The other two are fictional islands, obviously, but there are clues that point to their approximate locations. Rum Runner's Isle is located on this map of the Pirates of the Caribbean wiki page. As you can see, it's directly northwest of Tortuga and north and slightly east of Port Royal. Using these directions, Rum Runner's Isle perfectly matches up with the Ragged Island chain in the southern part of the Bahamas. Isla de Muerta, however, is not on the map because, as you surely know, it can only be found by those who already know where it is. So let's look at what we do know about it, starting with Hernan Cortez's treasure, which was paid to him in an attempt to stop the slaughter of the Aztecs, and cursed after he failed to do so. After Cortez conquered the Aztecs, he continued to explore the area, reaching the Gulf of California and heading down to Central America. Last in Honduras, he went back to Spain to argue against being stripped of his governing authority due to his greed. He took some treasure back with him, and this could be when it was discovered the 882 medallions were now cursed. According to the Pirates Wiki, the island wasn't cursed until the ship carrying the treasure crashed into it, which is how they would have found it by accident. So let's plot two courses going from Honduras to Spain, one going north and one south around Cuba. We know the island is perpetually covered by fog, surrounded by wrecked ships, and disappears into the sea in the time between Curse of the Black Pearl and Dead Man's Chest. Now that sounds an awful lot like the Bermuda Triangle, the area between Bermuda, Miami, and San Juan, Puerto Rico, which you can see here. The Pirates Wiki page also says Isla de Muerta is in relative proximity to Rum Runner's Isle, and thanks to Gibbs' explanation to Will about the connection between Jack and Barbossa, we know Barbossa coaxed the location away from Jack on their way to Isla de Muerta and then left him stranded. A safe assumption would be they originally left from Tortuga, so Rum Runner's Isle must be somewhere between those two locations, so it must be on Cortez's northern route, otherwise Barbossa would be sailing 2 days out of his way just to leave Jack stranded. So, somewhere along Cortez's northern route, inside the Bermuda Triangle, relatively close to Rum Runner's Isle, and in line with Tortuga, brings us right around here. Now that we know the locations, let's take a look at the timeline the movie depicts, which has the story taking place over 6 days. Day 1. Jack Sparrow arrives in Port Royal and Norrington becomes Commodore. Jack saves Elizabeth, then fights Will, and that night the Black Pearl attacks. Day 2. Will frees Jack, they commandeer the Interceptor and sail to Tortuga, reaching it at dusk. That night, Sparrow talks to Gibbs about his plan to use Turner's leverage with Barbossa. Day 3. Sparrow meets his crew in the morning and they head to Isla de Muerta. That night they are shown to still be sailing and are now caught in a storm. Day 4. They all arrive at Isla de Muerta around dawn and Barbossa finds out Elizabeth is not related to Bootstrap. Sparrow and Barbossa make a deal, the Pearl and Interceptor battle, and Elizabeth and Jack are left on Rum Runner's Isle. That night they sing and Elizabeth tricks Jack into drinking too much rum. Day 5. The rum is gone, though Elizabeth and Jack are rescued and they convince Norrington to head to Isla de Muerta. That night is the final battle. Day 6. Will frees Jack from his execution. Now let's see how long it should have actually taken. They didn't sail anywhere on day 1. On day 2, it appears Will and Jack leave Port Royal and arrive in Tortuga on the same day. Well, this is a distance of 492 kilometers, which would take 1 day, 12 hours, and 48 minutes to sail. We know they left around noon, seeing as how the sun was directly overhead as Jack and Will used the rowboat to walk underwater to the Dauntless. So at noon the next day, they still have around 13 hours to go, which would bring them in a little after midnight. But it is clearly nautical dusk when they arrive, the time when the sky is lit up but artificial light is still required for outdoor activities. And according to timeanddate.com, the latest this occurs in Haiti is around 8:20. Therefore, it must have taken 2 full days for them to arrive in Tortuga. Now this means it would have taken a little bit longer than the 1 day, 12 hours and 48 minutes to arrive, but since there were just 2 sailing a ship that usually took many to operate, it's likely they were traveling slower than normal, even with the Interceptor being the fastest ship in the Caribbean. So what the movie depicts happened in 1 day, leaving at noon and arriving at dusk, actually took 3. Leaving at noon on day 2, sailing all throughout day 3, and arriving in Tortuga at dusk at the end of what is now day 4. So Jack, Will, Gibbs, and the rest of the crew leave the next morning on day 5 and arrive at Isla de Muerta about 24 hours later. But this is a distance of 600 kilometers, which would take 1 day, 20 hours, and 55 minutes to sail. So they would not arrive the very next day, rather 2 days later. Sure, they had to sail through a storm, which may have slowed them down a bit, but at least they had a full crew this time. They arrive on day 7, just in time to rescue Elizabeth and steal the medallion. The next location is Rum Runner's Isle, 186 kilometers away, which would take 13 hours and 54 minutes to travel, not including the time it took for the battle. Well, looking at time and date again, the longest the Ragged Island chain receives full daylight is 13 hours and 31 minutes. And they are clearly in full daylight when they leave Isla de Muerta and when they arrive on Rum Runner's Isle. Plus, you can tell the shadows are nearly directly beneath Jack and Elizabeth, so it must be around noon. That would mean leaving Isla de Muerta and sinking the Interceptor on day 7 and arriving at Rum Runner's Isle on day 8. Now Elizabeth burns the rum on day 9, is rescued, and she and Jack convince Norrington to go to Isla de Muerta. On this trip, there is no issue with the timing because they're shown arriving after dark, so they could easily be getting there that same day, especially if they were rescued early enough. That night, the final battle occurs, the curse is lifted, and they head back to Port Royal. The distance from Isla de Muerta to Port Royal is 950 kilometers, which takes 2 days, 23 hours, and 6 minutes. That would mean leaving Isla de Muerta early on day 10, sailing all throughout days 11 and 12, and arriving at Port Royal on day 13. Executions happen at dawn according to Norrington earlier in the film. He could have easily led Jack straight to the noose when he saved Elizabeth on day 1, but he said,
Mr. Sparrow has a dawn appointment with the gallows. I would hate for him to miss it.
So that must be protocol, and Norrington hardly seems like a man to break procedure no matter the circumstances. So you figure all of day 13 getting ready, setting up the noose, and filing all charges against Jack, and then we get to Will freeing Jack early on day 14. So there you have it, going between all 4 locations, Port Royal to Tortuga, Tortuga to Isla de Muerta to Rum Runner's Isle and back again, and finally back to Port Royal is a round trip of 2,414 kilometers, which means the film glossed over most of 180 hours of travel that adds an additional 8 days to the timeline. So we should really thank the editors for cutting those days out. If the runtime were scaled up with the timeline, we'd have a 5-hour and 34-minute long movie, with 3 of those hours dedicated to Jack wandering around deck looking for the rum cache and trying out his latest catchphrases, while Barbossa stares longingly at a bushel of apples.